In this video, I'm going to be covering what I call zone training, so that way you can understand the basics of what you should be doing for your cardiovascular fitness. One of the reasons why I prefer to go by the zone training model that I've created with my Zeniverse is because the American Heart Association and the Center of Disease Control disagree on the percentages of what moderate intensity exercise and vigorous intensity exercise are. Yet they tell people that they need to do a certain number of minutes or hours per week of the two. Don't believe me? Check it out for yourself. The American Heart Association suggests that 50 to 70% of your theoretical maximum heart rate is moderate intensity. And they suggest that 70 to 85% of your theoretical maximum heart rate is your vigorous intensity. But the CDC doesn't agree with those numbers. The CDC suggests that 64 to 76% of your theoretical maximum heart rate is your moderate intensity, and that 77 to 93% is your vigorous intensity. So naturally, I combined the two to create a training model of 4 zone trainings. Technically 5. But the 5th one is for the intense athletes. If you're familiar with my channel, you might have been going between some of my dance videos or other workout videos for cardio, and you might see the zones pop up, zones 1 through 4. I use zone training to help guide your exercise. Zone training is different from rate of perceived exertion, which is basically something like the talk test, and it's very subjective from person to person. But zone training can be much more particular and much more objective. Let me cover the 4 zones, and I'll briefly touch on the 5th zone now. Zone 1 is your resting heart rate, which if you don't know what that is, go ahead and check out this video if it's not already there, and it'll walk you through resting heart rate. Your resting heart rate up until 57% of your theoretical maximum heart rate. This is easy. This is a walk in the park. This is very, very light. You would have to be in zone 1 for hours to get some aerobic exercise, but it's still healthy for circulation. And newer exercisers will spend some time warming up in zone 1. It's critical to not see zone 1 as being demoted if you're spending any time in this zone, because it is a really important precursor to the other zones. You want to be able to master that one if you are a sedentary individual before moving on. And you want to be able to spend a decent amount of time in zone 1 before your heart rate starts to suddenly pick up. This means that you're in better cardiovascular fitness. Zone 2 is more considered aerobic training, and this is between 58 and 67% of your theoretical maximum heart rate. Now, while I say this zone could be something like riding the bike lightly or going on an endurance run, I don't mean that as this is the activity you do to be in zone 2. Because there could be someone who is sedentary, who has never gone on the bike before, and their heart rate could shoot up to zone 4 because they're not ready yet at that point. It's just too much for them. So that's why I say it's like doing light bicycle riding, but again, it's really particular to your body, and that's why you don't want to go based off of certain types of activities. You want to be reading your heart rate. And before we go too much further, one really great way to measure your heart rate is with something like the Polar H10. It's a chest strap heart rate monitor, which is EKG based, which is very accurate. If you're interested in something as accurate as this chest heart rate monitor, I do have a link in the description below. But that's just one way. You can definitely take your pulse. It just sometimes gets old having to take your pulse. And that's why we're trying to track our heart rate during this. Your heart is the center of cardiovascular fitness. So don't assume that you can do cardio without watching your heart rate. Yes, eventually you can train yourself to be capable of understanding, hey, this is how I feel when my heart rate is at this certain zone. But you don't want to assume that, especially in the earlier stages when you're still getting used to your body. Let's move on to zone 3. Zone 3 is kind of a gray area between vigorous and the aerobic capacity, because some people can be training aerobically, meaning their body's just taking some oxygen, not using glucose yet, and moderate intensity activity that may start to require the use of your body's sugar storage or glucose. So that's why it's kind of a little in-between zone and may be considered more so the moderate intensity. This zone is basically 68 to 78% of your theoretical maximum heart rate. Let's move on to zone 4. Zone 4 is where I keep my general exercisers. And this one is the vigorous intensity, or at least the starting stages of the vigorous intensity. This zone 4 is roughly 79 to 89% of your theoretical maximum heart rate and is considered your anaerobic threshold. In other words, you're not using oxygen primarily, you're using glucose in your body. or the sugar storage in your body. For general exercisers training in this zone, this can be used for high intensity interval training, or a form of it at least. You can spend about 90-second intervals or 60 to 90-second intervals in something at this zone, and then pair it with a good break or a good rest interval. 3 minutes is even good. Give your body adequate rest so that way your body can replenish the glycogen stores, which is just your muscle's ability to hold that sugar that you need to be able to use that, since you're not using oxygen during this stage. So give yourself adequate rest in zone 4. What is rest intervals? Well, rest intervals can take you back down to a zone 2 or even a zone 1 for some people that are extremely cardiovascularly fit. Since you're watching this video and you care a lot about heart health, one way to make my heart happy is to hit the like button if you're enjoying this video. Thanks so much for doing that. Now let's end with zone 5. Now I don't usually use zone 5 in most of my workout videos that I share on YouTube, but zone 5 is excellent for specific athletes. This zone is roughly 90 to 100% of your maximal heart rate. Now for general exercises, I do not recommend pushing your theoretical maximum heart rate. I do recommend staying in zone 4. But for athletes that have possibly had an exact measurement, not just a theoretical calculation of their theoretical maximum heart rate, but a VO2 test or some specific test where they found this is exactly my maximum heart rate, it's no longer theoretical, you can venture into zone 5, given that you don't have any pre-existing cardiovascular conditions and that you have exercise cleared by your doctor. Zone 5 is true high intensity interval training, and there can be intervals lasting 20 to 30 seconds, but you have to make sure you have enough rest. 3 to 5 minutes of rest, again, enough so that way your body can restore, so that way you can be training in zone 5 for those intervals. Now, one more question you might have: what percent of my time should I be spending in each of these zones? Well, that's a great question. It depends on what your goals are. If you're an endurance athlete, you might be spending more time in zone 2 with some conditioning in zone 3. But if you're somebody who is an athlete for a sport that requires endurance and requires power, you might be training in zones 3, 4, and 5. And if you're a general exerciser looking to maintain a healthy weight, you might be spending more time in zones 2 and then a little bit of time in zone 3 and 4. It really depends on what your goals are. There is, however, a model called the Polarized model, or the Polarized Heart Rate Model, which suggests that you should spend 80% of your time exercising your aerobic capacity. For example, more in the lines of zone 2, and 20% of your time in zones 3 and 4. This is just a suggestion though. Everybody is different and every goal is different. So now you understand the zone training model and you're ready to try out a workout video with the zone training, but maybe you might not quite know your theoretical maximum heart rate. And if you don't, if it's not already there, I have a video that uses the most accurate formula, which is not 220 minus your age, that is going around in popularity. I have the most accurate formula, which is Tanaka, that you'll want to check out to calculate your theoretical maximum heart rate. If it's not already there, I've got this video that might be perfect